please join me in welcoming John Wonder.
All right, thanks for that introduction, Katie. I'm really excited to be talking about attack sightings here at ATT&CKcon, especially because it was at ATT&CKcon last year where I actually had some of the first conversations about sightings with some of you that are here today. And a lot of that conversation inspired what you're seeing up here. We kind of took those notes. And so when I talk about sightings today, just keep in mind that that's kind of as a result of you talking about it. I think it also addresses a lot of the things that we heard today, a lot of the needs that we heard today, the need to be able to prioritize defenses and the need to be able to really make our threat intelligence actionable. And so out of all of that, we've kind of collected together this idea for attack sightings. But before I talk about sightings, I really want to talk about threat intelligence reports. Threat intelligence reports are great. They can tell you about new and interesting techniques. They can tell you about tools. They can tell you about what different threat actors are up to. Threat intelligence reports are really great at writing up, kind of finalized, really detailed information about what actors are doing and what tools are doing and what new techniques are out there. That said, threat intelligence reports maybe are not the best way to answer every single question we have, right? Threat intelligence reports are one form of threat intelligence, but there's other forms of threat intelligence as well. So threat intelligence reports are, for example, they take a long time to write. You have to have an analyst write them. You have to have them usually go through like legal, your marketing teams. You have to have them go through publications and be produced, and then they have to get out there, and then people have to read them. So we see like a number of threat intelligence reports, obviously. There's a lot of them. But scale-wise, there's not as many threat intelligence reports as there are incidents out there or as there are events out there. And so just the scale and scope of things that are covered by finished intelligence reporting is not as broad as what we see out there. And second, threat intelligence reports are really focused on that in-depth analysis of things that are new and novel, right? We're not going to be writing intelligence reports about, the ways, adversary A used PowerShell for the zillionth time. And what that means is threat intelligence reports are great. They help us inform attack. Like attack wouldn't be what it is without threat intelligence reports. But there is also a need for other types of threat intelligence, and that's where sightings come in. As we think about how to answer these types of questions, that's where we see these more sightings type of use cases. And I'll talk about what that means in a minute. But just think about how you would answer these types of questions today. Which techniques are more or less common? That can be tough to answer with threat intelligence reporting because are your threat intelligence reports talking about this technique because it happens more often or because it's more novel and more interesting and more unique? Second, how do techniques tend to be used together or in conjunction with each other? This is something that have a great set of raw data would really help us answer. How do we actually see things when they happen on a box? Third, how has usage changed over time? Threat intelligence reports are often, encompass data from many, many years or many months. And so it's hard to tell sometimes at more of an atomic level, what does it look like this year versus last year versus the year before? That needs a more atomic type of information as well. And lastly, how does prevalence differ by sector or things like geographic area? How do we more look kind of at an in-depth level at exactly what we're seeing here? Again, threat intelligence reports talk about this. They talk about geographic area and sector a lot, but just the breadth and depth of that reporting is not as big as it could be if you look at the scope of incidents and events that happen out in the world. So this is where we see attack sightings fitting in. I've used that word a bunch of times now. What do I actually mean by that? So when I think about attack sightings, I think about observations that provide evidence that an attack technique is in use. Wouldn't that be great to know, to have evidence when an attack technique is in use without having to go read all of these threat intelligence reports necessarily? We can think of a couple different types of threat intelligence reports as well, of sightings as well. So direct technique sightings. So if you think about the different ways you might have evidence of a attack technique in use, one way is you're looking at your logs and you're digging in there and you're seeing actions happen on your systems and networks that directly correspond to an attack technique. So for example, if I'm looking at credential dumping and I see, for example, a memory read of lsas.exe, that is direct evidence that credential dumping has occurred on that machine. That's really great evidence that that technique happened. But there's other types of evidence as well, right? We might not have something quite that conclusive, for example. So Mimikatz is a tool that's capable of doing credential dumping. What if Mimikatz is blocked at the firewall? We blocked it by download because we have a known hash for it or something like that. That's not quite as good as the evidence as seeing the actual memory dump, but it's a pretty good indication that our adversaries are trying to do credential dumping, right? If you see Mimikatz being blocked to your firewall. So direct software sightings are kind of this idea that we've seen a piece of software that enables us to do a technique. Indirect software sightings are really getting at this concept of tips and threat intelligence reporting that goes through kind of more automated Stix-TAXI mechanisms. So maybe I see an indicator shared for Mimikatz.exe. I didn't see it myself. I don't know that it actually, whether it was a successful attack, whether it was not successful, I don't know exactly where it happened. But the fact that somebody is sharing a hash for Mimikatz tells me that that is probably in use, and therefore that the adversaries are looking to do credential dumping. So hopefully you can see that while these are different levels of evidence, some of them are really great direct evidence of a technique occurring, others are more indirect evidence. It's still evidence that a technique is in use in the real world. And that's really what we want to get at with attack sightings. We at the kind of the attack team feel like something that will be really useful is more direct evidence of attack techniques in use in the real world. And that's what this idea is about. So in order to help enable that, and in order to make that happen, we've kind of proposed this idea of attack sightings. And I've talked to some of you about this, and I'm happy to talk to more of you about it today if you come find me after. But what we're proposing now is MITRE collects sightings from multiple organizations. So we take in some of these sightings. When you think about a sighting, so I talked about those three types. Think about that type of sighting, technique ID, maybe tactic ID, timestamp maybe, and maybe some other metadata. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about a sighting. What if MITRE collected a bunch of those? They were anonymized at some level, either before or after they get to MITRE. And then we can kind of aggregate them and make intelligent kind of decisions and reports based off of those things. We could publish insights. And ideally, if we get a good amount of data and we feel like it makes sense, we could also publish data sets that help researchers like yourselves figure out insights that we at MITRE maybe couldn't ever figure out. So the idea here is to kind of collect this create this sightings ecosystem where we're constantly collecting telemetry about what attack techniques are in usage in the wild and republishing that back out, both in terms of insights as well as more in terms of raw data. You can imagine it looking like this. So along the left side, you can see the kind of the systems that are under attack, basically. So all of our individual laptops, all of our servers, all of our infrastructure. And we're doing security monitoring on those things. And that security monitoring is hopefully, when we have an attack, going to lead to detections. At some level, those detections will create reporting, right? So we can do reporting of those detections. That might happen through your ISACs or your ISOWs. Maybe you have an MSSP or a security vendor or something that you're working with. And that point right there I really want to highlight, because if you're working with those ISOWs, your MSSPs, that's a great way to anonymize the data before it gets to MITRE. One thing MITRE doesn't necessarily want to do is be responsible for collecting a lot of really sensitive data about where techniques are seen in the wild at specific organizations. We're happy to work with you if you are one of those end user organizations and you do want to contribute what you find, but we think it makes a lot of sense really to look at the ISACs and the ISOWs and the people that are collecting data from multiple organizations at the same time so that they can do the anonymization for us. We'll continue to look at it in an anonymized way. We'll try to aggregate it. We have some people that are privacy experts and can also look at how to keep it from being de-anonymized. And then the idea is that we can publish those insights. So that's kind of the operating model that we're hoping for here. In this, we have three communities of interest that we really want to help enable and protect. So one is contributors are probably the most important part of this ecosystem. They are the people that are providing information of value. MITRE is not providing information of value here. So the contributors are really the most important part of this community. And so we want to make sure that A, they're able to really easily contribute, B, they're protected from disclosing too much information, and C, that they're acknowledged for providing something of value. We want to give people credit when they give information that helps the community, even if we do anonymize it. Second, we want to be able to help defenders. So that's, most of us here are defenders, whether we're threat intel analysts or whether we're operators or whether we're hunters. We want to help we want to be able to help defenders kind of prioritize actions, prioritize what threat intelligence they do look at to see more information. We want to help them understand and communicate the value of their work. It's really easy to communicate value if you can say, well, I now have a detection for this thing that happened 10,000 times last year, or X number of times last year, more so than here's this thing that I saw in a couple reports. And lastly, we want to help them change their defenses based on what we're seeing changed in the adversary behavior. Lastly, we want to help researchers. So there's a lot of great research that's happening in the cyber defense space, and a lot of that research needs good data. And I think by publishing some of these data sets out, we can enable that research by anonymizing it and making sure that the contributors are safe, but also giving researchers what they need to do their jobs. Helping them develop new defensive approaches, understand how adversary usage may differ by sector. I think we all kind of internally think that and know that probably a finance sector is attacked differently than defense industrial base. But it would be great to have data that kind of proves that, right? So we're not just relying on our own intuition. And lastly, to do things that I can't even think of. I needed 3 bullets on each of these columns, so I need some researchers to come up with a third item here. So how can you contribute? We wanted to make it as easy as possible. First is email us at attack@miter.org, or find me after the break, or find any MITRE team member. We're happy to hook you up. We want to make this as easy as possible to contribute. You'll need to generate some data. We have a data format that we defined. It's kind of a pretty straightforward JSON format. You can create that yourself. MISP was great enough. If you know the MISP developers, you tell them an idea and they have it developed within the next day or two. And that was the case here. We talked to them about sightings, and as of now, you can use MISP to export sightings out and then contribute that back to MITRE. Or if you have something else you're using, if you're using sticks or if you're using CSV files, send us whatever you have, and we'll take it. We're basically willing to, we care about the data. We don't care necessarily what format you get us the data in. And then send it to us. I did want to call out some related work here. First of all, Red Canary released a threat detection report last year, and if Twitter can be trusted, I guess they're releasing another one soon. That talked about the top 10 techniques that they found in the wild. And they also gave great tips on how to find those techniques when you see them. Second, Carl mentioned the CrowdStrike Overwatch reporting before. They've released 2 reports with 2 different heat maps. One thing I thought they really did that made a lot of sense in their second report, the mid-year report that they just released recently, was they talked about changes from the 2018 report to the 2019 mid-year report, and also where you maybe should not take some of those changes as seriously because there might be issues in some of the data. So they thought, we're pretty thoughtful about what changes actually mean, and maybe some of the changes aren't as significant as they seem. And lastly, Varus. So Varus does a lot of like incident metadata type of work, the demographics of incidents. We think this is complementary to that. So current status is we're collecting sightings under NDA. You don't necessarily have to sign an NDA to contribute sightings. We find that many organizations want to just to help protect themselves, with the goal of having more contributions over this year and eventually move towards having those insights being able to be published. All right, that's what I got. Thank you. Here's a URL you can go to get involved. Email us, come find me after, and I'm happy to take questions.
So what we might do is we were right on time, actually. You finished right on the dot. Thank you for that, John. So John will be hanging out at the reception, I believe, tonight as well, and tomorrow. So please come talk to him. We want your data, and we'll anonymize it. So thank you so much, John.